Powerful tsunamis, intense rainfall and sinking cities. Asia has faced an onslaught of extreme weather events. And now a new documentary is investigating their links to climate change. The four-part series, Changing Oceans Asia, was produced by the Earth Observatory of Singapore, and it seeks to examine the relationship between the oceans and people and explore solutions that policymakers can adopt to guard against climate change. The series puts Southeast Asia in the spotlight, in part due to the region's rich marine biodiversity and because it's at high risk of rising sea levels.
And for more on this, we speak to Professor Benjamin Horton. He's director of the Earth Observatory of Singapore. Professor Horton, let's look at this high risk because whatever processes drive the rise in ocean levels, Southeast Asia sees those processes being amplified. Explain how that works.
Well, regarding climate change in Southeast Asia, many of the processes that influence climate change are at the extremes in the tropics. So we can talk about tropical cyclones, where you get the maximum wind speeds and the greatest storm surges hitting the coastlines of Southeast Asia. Whether you're talking about heavy rainfall and flooding and the associated catastrophic landslides, or whether we talk about extreme heat, we know in Singapore we have many days of the year where temperatures are well in excess of 30 degrees centigrade. And then we have sea level rise, where we have a very vulnerable population. It is projected by the end of this century, if we don't do anything about climate change, that 1 billion people will be subject to annual flooding.
Professor Horton, tell us something about the manner in which this docuseries was produced. What did your researchers set out to achieve? And also, what did they discover along the way?
Well, it's a four-part documentary series. In the first part, we're talking about how urban areas in Southeast Asia are susceptible to and how they can become resilient to climate change. The second episode looks at extreme processes of storm surges, of rainfall and their associated flooding. In the third episode, we look at our coral reef environments. What threats are they under and what solutions do we have? And then in the fourth episode, we concentrate on sea level rise. We try to understand the processes, the impacts and the innovative solutions that we can apply here in Singapore and export to the rest of the world.
If there were findings specific to Singapore, they are relevant because if I quote research that you have done, you have pointed out that there's a 1 in 20 chance that the sea level rise here in Singapore could be in excess of 2.5 meters by 2100. And that's in contrast to the more optimistic forecast of just 1 meter. Given the findings that you have and given this rather more pessimistic outlook for Singapore in terms of sea level rises, what findings would you find specific to us here?
Well, regarding Singapore, the threat to Singapore is that we're a low-lying coastal nation, and the existential threat is located 10,000 kilometres away in Antarctica. Your viewers have to be aware of how large the Antarctic ice sheet is. It's 20,000 times the size of Singapore. It's 2 to 3 kilometres thick, and it has enough water within it to raise global sea levels by 65 metres. 65 metres. And therefore, you only need to melt a small percentage of this ice sheet to have catastrophic effects. In the documentary series, we also discuss why Singapore is a hotspot for sea level, that it will have greater than the global average. And this is related to the gravity of the planet. I've just described how big Antarctica is, and anything of that size has a large gravitational attraction. So water is attracted towards it. When that ice sheet loses mass, the water repels away from the ice sheet and migrates towards the tropical oceans. So at the Earth Observatory of Singapore, we ran some models. And if the Antarctic ice sheet loses 1 metre of sea level rise, Singapore would receive 30% greater than the global average at 1.3 metres.
Professor Horton, a great deal has been said about the world investing now to build green, resilient, inclusive recovery as we navigate this pandemic. What's at stake now for governments and the global economy when it comes to rallying together to fight climate change?
Well, this documentary series is about the oceans. We are a blue planet. 70% of our ocean surface occupies the Earth. We live in a maritime continent of Southeast Asia. We live in Singapore, which is surrounded by oceans. So every single person in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, and in the world depends upon a healthy ocean. It controls the air that we breathe, the weather that we experience, the food that we eat, and the water that we drink. So if we want a healthy society, we need a healthy ocean. And this documentary series discusses the impacts that we have in our oceans and also discusses the solutions. This is centered around Singapore. It's another example of Singapore punching above its weight, providing solutions here for the waters around Singapore that can be applied to the oceans around the world. The other element that we discuss in the documentary series is that we're very fortunate in Singapore to live in a country where the governmental agencies put research funding for the institutes of higher education, such as NTU, to do world-class science, to look at the processes, the impacts, and the solutions of climate change. And then the final thing I would say is that we live in a country where the government has a green plan, and the basis of that green plan is to protect and preserve the natural capital, not only on the land, but also in our oceans.
Professor Horton, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this evening on this new docuseries. That was Professor Benjamin Horton, Director of the Earth Observatory of Singapore.